Hi, today we're going to talk about gestational diabetes, which is high blood sugar in pregnancy. This presentation will take about half an hour. You can pause it in between and review the slides using your navigation buttons, and you can review the entire slide presentation from the start, and any questions you might have you can review with your diabetes nurse educator or with the dietitian in a telephone consultation or a video consultation, which can be arranged for you. Let's get started. So, a question lots of women have when they are told that they have gestational diabetes is, why do I have this? What happens in pregnancy is your body changes, and the placenta, which is the thing that feeds your baby, develops, is that you have a lot of hormonal changes. And some of those hormones make you less sensitive to insulin. And I'll explain a bit about how insulin works later. Some folk have an increased chance of developing gestational diabetes, and some of these risk factors, as we call them, include if someone in your family has diabetes, if you have overweight or obesity. There are certain ethnic groups which have increased diabetes rates, and these include women from India and also women with an Afro-Caribbean background, but there are a number of other ethnicities that also have increased rates of diabetes. If you had a previous pregnancy with gestational diabetes, there's an increased chance that you will have it again in subsequent pregnancies. And if you had a large baby in your previous pregnancy, and what I mean with a large baby is over the 4.5 kilo mark, or well over the 95th centile. If you have gestational diabetes, one of the first questions you'll probably be asking yourself is, what does this mean for me and my baby? So one of the things we see increasing in women with gestational diabetes is the chance that they will have a large baby. Most of the time that large baby will be healthy and will be delivered the normal way, but some of these babies could have low blood sugars after delivery. It's usually the first day that they can deal with this. It's called hypoglycemia, and it's something that we look for in babies that are particularly big when they're born, but also in babies of women that have had to be treated with medication for their blood sugars while they were pregnant. You may also have an increased chance of your blood pressure going up towards the end of pregnancy. This is called gestational hypertension, or can be called preeclampsia. And we see more cesarean sections, which makes sense considering that babies might be bigger. In the long term, so that's well after your baby's arrived, if you've had gestational diabetes, may have an increased chance of developing diabetes in later life yourself, outside pregnancy. Gestational diabetes treatment consists of two main pillars. The first one is diet. And diet sounds like you need to lose weight, but that's not what we mean here. We mean you should eat a healthy diet. More about that later in this presentation. The other pillar is that you should be measuring your own blood sugars, and I'm going to explain all about that later as well. If, despite your efforts to eat a healthy diet, your blood sugars still stay high, we sometimes use medication, but that only occurs in a minority of women with gestational diabetes. And that medication could be insulin, and sometimes we recommend tablets. After delivery, almost all women will find that their blood sugars have normalized within 24 hours. But, as I mentioned before, you might find that your blood sugars might come back after pregnancy. Either in your next pregnancy, the chance of that occurring is over 50%, or later in life. That means that we recommend having annual sugar checkups at your GP, your general practitioner, until 5 years after pregnancy. I'd like to talk a little bit about carbohydrates and how they make your blood sugars go up. Carbohydrates I'll talk about later too. They're in your food. So some of the food you might eat would have carbohydrates. For example, if you have a slice of bread or a glass of juice, both of those will contain carbohydrates. When you eat them or drink it, they will enter your intestinal tract. And there, those carbohydrates will be broken down from food into a particular sugar that we call glucose. That glucose will enter your bloodstream, and that means that your blood sugar will go up. And insulin is the hormone that your own body produces that helps provide energy to the body cells. And what you can sometimes see in women with gestational diabetes is that while their blood sugars are normally in that white horizontal normal range, after food they can go up, and that means there's too much blood sugar in the bloodstream. Hypothetically, it could also mean that there is too little insulin, but that's much less of an issue in gestational diabetes. As I mentioned before, nutrition and gestational diabetes really pivots around the concept of eating healthy. Healthy nutrition is what we'd like you to focus on in the treatment of gestational diabetes. That means plenty of vegetables. If you're picking carbohydrates, you should be choosing whole grains, whole grain pasta, whole grain bread, replacing any fizzy drinks you might have or sugary teas by water, and generally just keeping healthy. But I'll tell you more about that later. This is an example of potatoes, beans, or slices of bread, or pasta, rice. Those products all contain starch and therefore contain a lot of carbohydrate. But they're not the only source of carbohydrates in your food. You might find them also in dairy products. They're called lactose. The carbohydrates in dairy products are called lactose, and you might find them in milk or in other dairy products. Lactose actually means milk sugar. Another example of carbohydrate would be fructose, which is fruit sugar. You find that obviously in fruit or fruit juices, but also in things like honey. So what we do recommend is that you don't have too much fruit if you have high blood sugars in pregnancy. So this is an example showing you how much of that type of sugar would be in each of these types of fruits. If you have one portion of fruit, a portion would be considered any type of quantity that would fit in one hand. So that might be one apple or one pear or an orange, or a small bowl of soft fruit like cherries or strawberries, or just half a mango, half a banana, or half a handful of grapes. That would be just 10 to 12 grapes, or 2 mandarins, nectarines or kiwis, or 3 plums. We also recommend not having too much fruit juice, or really just avoiding fruit juice. Even if it's unsweetened, it still contains plenty of that fructose. Here's an example of 2 bottles of, or the labels on 2 bottles of drink. One's a juice and the other one's a bottle of Coke. And if you read those labels, it might be a bit difficult to tell here, but you can see that each of them contain a similar amount of energy. If we're looking at those labels, the top says energy, and it says 171 kilojoules, which is the measure of energy in it on the left, and the other one's 180 kilojoules. So they're quite similar. If we then zoom in on that, we look at how much of that is actually sugar. We actually see that 9 grams out of each 100 milliliters or glass is in fact just sugar, and there's very little other stuff in there, and that goes for each of these products. So they're probably both products you would want to be avoiding if you were diagnosed with high blood sugar in pregnancy. Another example of carbohydrate you might find in food is saccharose, which is what we call sugar. So they're those lumps of sugar, but that's also what you might find in candy or on lots of spreads that you might put on your slice of bread, like a jam or chocolate spread. And it's also the type of sugar you find in fizzy soft drinks. So what we really recommend is that you avoid having these types of fast sugars. So that's when you have candy or sweets, biscuits or cakes or pastries, they all contain that saccharose, those lumps of sugar. We also recommend you don't have sugar in your coffee or tea. By the way, that goes for honey as well. You should avoid having honey in your tea to sweeten. And we recommend that you have no soft drinks. So why are we focusing so much on the difference between So that's what we recommend. If you spread your carbs by, for instance, in this example, showing those little cones which represent 3 large meals with a high peak, they'll give you 3 blood sugar peaks. Whereas if you were to have smaller meals and healthy snacks in between, that would avoid your blood sugar from peaking. That's represented here. So what we also recommend is that you balance your carbs. If you look at this plate, you can see on the plate, if you were to fill up those segments on the left, it says in Dutch, vegetables, and that's half of the plate. If you look at the right-hand side of the plate, there's a top portion which says protein, and the bottom portion on the right is carbohydrate. So that's basically what you want your plate to look like. You want to have half of it set up with vegetables. On the right-hand side, you could have half of the rest of the plate, so it's a quarter of your plate filled with protein. And what do I mean by protein? Well, that would be any meat or fish or egg or soy product. And then you'd want only a quarter of your plate to be filled with carbohydrates, for instance, starchy foods like rice, pasta, potatoes, pulses, or bread. But remember, in filling that quarter of your plate with carbohydrates, try and pick those carbohydrates that produce a lower blood sugar spike. So they're whole grains, whole grain pasta, whole grain rice, and your plate might end up looking something like this, where you see all those healthy vegetables on the left, some grilled chicken on the right, and only a very small helping of rice. So here we are again, choosing those whole grains, looking at, aiming at a lower rise in sugar and less constipation. So we're choosing our brown rice, our whole grain breads, whole grain pastas, and trying to have those wheat products with the wheat germ included. Another tip we like to share with people is to exercise. And we're recommending exercising at least 30 minutes a day to women with gestational diabetes. Really, for all women that are pregnant, we recommend 30 minutes at least of mild to moderate exercise. And you could think of any type of exercise. You can do cycling, just make sure you take enough stairs, even things like cleaning the house or taking a walk for lunch. Swimming's also not a problem unless you, of course, have specific instructions from your doctor to not be swimming because of complications. You could be taking any of those sorts of exercise. We know that they're all safe and, in fact, increase your chance of having a healthy outcome from your pregnancy. So definitely, and we know that these 30 minutes of exercise or more are quite a good way of controlling your blood sugar. So highly recommended to exercise. What I'd like to talk about now is how to go about measuring your blood sugars. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, after I've explained about the diet, you're going to be wanting to know whether your blood sugars are responding to the diet. So on this slide, you can see an example of one of the many types of blood sugar measurement devices there are. What's important for you to remember is before we go into instructing on how to do is that you need to wash your hands. There are many other reasons why it's wise for you to be washing your hands at this point in our COVID epidemic, but for measuring your blood sugars, it's good to know if you have dirty hands or you've just had something to eat, that's going to affect you in your blood sugar reading. So let's get step by step how to do your blood sugar measurement. So first of all, you need to go and get that blood from your finger. What you need to do is get one of your lancets ready by breaking off the tip, not twisting the whole tip off, clicking it in to your device, taking off the cap, replacing it by the other cap, and then doing your finger prick. This slide shows you where in the finger you can prick. You can use any finger on either hand, and you can alternate fingers as you go. Just make sure that you use that soft part of the tip of your finger to get your blood. This slide will show you how to set up your measuring strip. So there we are with your sugar measuring device and the strip. You apply that strip to the measuring device, then you do your finger prick, and then you let that strip absorb some of the blood. So you try not to drip the blood on the strip, but you actually hang the strip into the blood and just slowly let it absorb there. And then you can take your reading, and you can see that biggest number on your measuring device is in fact your blood sugar number. And we'll often ask you to record that in writing in a little booklet in which you can record all of the measurements that you take over the day. How many times a day should you be measuring? Well, we recommend measuring 4 times a day unless you've been otherwise instructed. First measurement is taken early in the morning when you first get up, when you're fasting. Second measurement is taken 2 hours after you've eaten your breakfast. Then third one is taken 2 hours after you've finished eating your lunch. And the last one is taken 2 hours after you've finished eating your dinner. So you're taking 4 measurements a day, and we want you to do that every day. And it's quite well possible, if everything goes well, that your diabetes nurse educator might give you the okay for measuring just 2 or 3 times a week. But we do recommend measuring at least 2 a week up until delivery, unless, of course, your diabetes team decides otherwise. Your nurse educator will review your blood sugar measurements, but you're obviously going to be curious about whether you're getting your targets. And here's the slide is discussing which numbers are actually your target. So for fasting blood sugars, you'd like them to be under 5.3. And for any measurement taken 2 hours after your main meal, we'd like them to be under 6.7. Now, don't be alarmed, especially in the beginning of your adaptations in diet, if you get a reading that's a little bit over those targets. There's a run-in period of about 2 weeks in which you're trying to change your diet and get your blood sugars back in target. If, however, it's very difficult for you to get your blood sugars within those target ranges, the diabetes team may recommend taking medication to help you control those blood sugars. This is an example of the diabetes team. They generally consist of diabetes nurse educators. There's an endocrinologist, a dietitian, and an obstetrician involved. This doesn't mean that these people are the only people that will be involved in your antenatal care. You may see other obstetricians or midwives, but these people are the main points of contact that you will have. Mondays are important days for us. It's the day that you will be asked to get in touch with your diabetes nurse educator and send per email or per telephone, make sure that she has access to your blood sugar measurements. She'll review them with you and give you feedback and tell you how to proceed. There are some websites that can tell you a little bit more about your personal carb intake. However, many of these are in Dutch. They're from reliable sources. The Voedingscentrum site is considered a reliable source, but I'm afraid much of their information is only available in Dutch. So you might need some help with that if your main language is not Dutch. An example of one of these sites will give you the opportunity to complete a meal plan with your personal meal and will help you calculate how much that meal contains in terms of carbohydrates, and it will guide you in what the recommendations are for a healthy meal, not containing more than 50 grams of carbs, and where a healthy snack would contain no more than 15 grams of carbs. I'd like to thank you for your attention, for sitting it out, and we look forward to helping you in this pregnancy and wish you all the best in this pregnancy.